I wish you would look at some of this. So everybody talking about the Ten Commandments as though that's the part of the law that's relevant now, and because it was inside the ark or something, and that we have to obey that much. Meanwhile, they ignoring the Sabbath when that's clearly in the law. So honestly, I'd have to agree more with the kind of rabbinical interpretation because they actually say that the Ten Commandments is a summary of the rest of the law, and I agree with that. I believe that within the law is the whole law, like that within these Ten Commandments is kind of the whole law that they substitute as a more brief, maybe the rest, uh, like was just a detail that you just had to put next to it, or what have you, that it's really not some separate thing that there's 613 laws and 10 apply to everybody and 603 only apply. That's nonsense. But they had been doing this for so long that they had created this 10 commandments uh, fetish, basically, that they had inserted it into the Bible that now we don't even know where it ends and where it begins. Because first off, let me just get something out of the way. I want to show y'all uh, this chapter 34, Exodus, verse 16. It says, "And you take the daughters for your sons, and the daughters, um, you know, and so on and so forth." But uh, mostly this verse 15, it says, "Lest you make a covenant with them in the heavens of this land, and when they play the harlot after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and one invites you to eat the sacrifices, that's how you be playing the harlot, by eating at their house." So there it is. That's 34, 15, and 16 in Exodus. I know that a lot of people have been struggling trying to find where it say in the law that you can't eat at a Gentile's house, to talk about Acts 9 or Acts 10. Now, it's a, you know, that they supposed to sacrifice the firstborn donkey and everything, all that opens the womb. Well, and they redeem him with the lamb. And so this is probably what Jeremiah was talking about, that he was never about to, all this sacrificing the firstborn. And that's something that we see in Matthew, what, chapter 2? And, Exodus, chapter 1. And, all this evil with sacrificing the innocents. It seemed that was a big thing back then. And so uh, I just wanted to kind of talk about the Ten Commandments because I don't know that it's like y'all say that there's something majestically different and universal and infinite about the Ten Commandments. I think that the Ten Commandments is part and parcel of the Torah. And for that reason, it's not clear. Like when you read Exodus, they keep on talking about putting the testimony in the ark, but it's not always referred to as the 10. In the one place it is, they might have added that. Now when we go to Exodus 17, and they might have added that from Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy chapter 10, they really try to spell it out, and Deuteronomy chapter 31 to further say that the other part of the law is outside. But Deuteronomy was, especially the end, was written much later. Even the basic oral transmission of it was clearly past the reforms of Josiah, and that's a very, very late date, relatively. And so there had already been the fall of Israel and everything by that point, and so I wanted to, yeah, I don't really understand how Amalek is. I'll do that on another video, but if we go here, chapter 17, it's a, um, they have moved on from sin, so that's why I get confusing because I would say Numbers was written later. That Numbers, it's, you gotta understand this two witnesses thing. So what Numbers is trying to make two witnesses to a lot of things that already happened in Exodus, and the things that wasn't happening in Exodus, and we told Deuteronomy is trying to get some new things in as well as retell some of that, give it add a second witness, and that's why Deuteronomy is the most suspect because when you read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, it's not really written in first person except for maybe a few additions. Now, when you get into Deuteronomy, it's very much written in first person. So that's where you get this Book of Moses. Well, you have some of the most tricky verses in Deuteronomy, such as the Canaanites was there in that time, and Moses died in that time. Well, how's the Canaanites gonna be there and Moses died in that time and it not be the time that was written? It don't really add up. So definitely Deuteronomy is by far the most suspect. As you know, and also that's very in terms of being a late date in terms of criticism. But Numbers is, I would say, written after Joshua, Leviticus, Exodus, and Genesis, at least the oral transmissions that they stem from. And Numbers is very reflective of the Shasu people who was out in the wilderness developing bronze instruments for battle and getting fanatic as the bloodlust grew. And so, and how easy it is to produce blood when you have a sharp metal instrument too, which really revolutionized their fanaticism. And so, for these reasons, you have this situation where they was in they had moved on from Sinai and they had gone on to Horeb. But this is interesting because Numbers is that same thing, but Exodus, when we look at it, you get that renewed covenant at the end of Exodus already when the tribulation in the wilderness of sin and everybody first generation going under. Well, it wasn't until the next generation that they got the new law. Well, we have that at the end of Exodus too. So the order has been twisted around for them to prove some kind of message. And this Ten Commandments, whether it was the Christians or the Pharisees that had came before them, someone had done this, and this had become increasingly popularized in Amsterdam and stuff, where a lot of the Ashkenazi had a big influence. And this is big in Protestantism that want to evangelicals that want to put the Ten Commandments on the courtyard and everything. And so they have gone as far as say Jesus is talking about the Ten Commandments, that when he say this is the most important law and that's the most important law, that he's talking about the Ten Commandments. No, he's talking about a particular couple positive commandments, mind you. Do this and do that. And one pulled from I think Leviticus 19, the other pulled from Deuteronomy, something or other. So these positive laws is not these negative laws of the Old Testament do not, and so on and so forth. But they want to say that that's complete equivalency, and somehow throw their father and mother in the Sabbath. And I mean, they just doing the most, really, with this, thinking the Ten Commandments is somehow part of the Christian law, whereas the rest of the law is part of the Jewish law or whatever. They really doing the most, and there's no good reason for it. The Ten Commandments is really just part of the whole law, and you either is or is not under the law. That you can't be picking and choosing. This was written by God. I mean, even if that was true, that they didn't just add that part and so on and so forth, that it still doesn't mean it wasn't a summary of the rest of the law. And so that's what they're doing with Deuteronomy, Numbers, and especially Numbers when they telling you the same thing that happened in Exodus, these two locations, and because you go from 17 in Exodus to 34, you be assuming that they went from Oreb back to Sinai and that they're the same place and they around Egypt and all that, when really they over by Moab, clearly in Numbers, and that makes sense when you really think about how these were Chalcodonic, these are the Bronze Age Semitic people, meaning Persian people, Medes, and what have you, Farsis and all that had come down and posted up in the desert, and they dressed like Arabs and they act like Arabs and all that when they and had camels and what have you, and they had gone even as far as Egypt. I mean, that's where the story of Exodus even come from. Had gone to Egypt. I mean, whereas Abraham had even had his wife he had pulled a trick with the Pharaoh and all that, and so you have this, and this is where the word Yahweh come from. It come from the word to move in Egyptian, and so this has to do with, which is clearly seen in Exodus, the difference between white magic and black magic. And the first iconoclast, and this was Moses the iconoclast, where he talked about, as we see here in Exodus 34, that we can't, there'd be a thorn in your side and what have you if you didn't rid them out, but they didn't rid them out, and that's that. So you have this iconoclasm where in Exodus 34, destroy this, destroy that. Well, this is actually an Egyptian thing, because there was Achaman at or whatever, the Egyptian pharaoh from the time of Moses, like 1200 BC, that had went around and destroyed all the relics of all the other gods, because he believed that his god was the supreme god, and these other gods would undermine his god. That the leaders and the priests of these gods would so this is all where that come from. This is Egyptian story, of the Elohist tradition, which is Leviticus and Joshua and all that. And then you have a later tradition, which is the Persian, basically Scythian, a lot of them that had come down and had dwelled in the desert and had posted up and invaded and took over Jericho before they even had walls, and so on and so forth. And this might happen in various waves. I mean, maybe a later wave of Persians actually did destroy the walls of Persian earlier Aliyahs that had come in. And so, who knows, really? I mean, this was prehistoric to the max. And so, we just have to kind of try to figure it out using a little logic. And that's where I'm going to end it. I got a big video coming, Numbers 14. So, and y'all know, if y'all been watching me, I've been on track, or I've been trying to get up to Numbers 14 for a while now, and this is partly information towards that goal. So we getting it in. All right, peace.